if you can get a group of players that understand you as a coach, and it's not a change because you're feeling weak, it's a change because you want to be stronger. You want to change because you're at that moment in time, maybe not have as much possession as the opposition. So therefore you want to try and commandeer the ball. So therefore we need more people in one area of the field of play, or more people in one unit of the field of play. The way football is now in the last 5-10 years, if you're willing to put your whole coaching credentials on the table and say, I'm going to play and play and play right the way through your career, and you live and die by that, you stand or fall by that, then you've got a great chance of succeeding.
So, hello, captains of Armband. Welcome to another episode of Short Corner, where we interview footballers, managers, coaches, analysts, scouts, and directors of various football clubs to bring the different aspects of the game closer to you. And today with us, we have Mr. Phil Brown himself, the former head coach of English club Hull City, the Indian Super League club Hyderabad FC, and I will not lie, I'm still having goosebumps to have him in our show. So, Mr. Phil Brown, how have you been?
It's been too long. I've been away from India since March, and it's been too long. I need to come back there as soon as possible. But no, thanks very much for inviting me on the show. Look forward to imparting a lot of my experiences that I've had either in India or in England, and hopefully people can learn from them.
Totally, we can learn from them, sir. With a vast experience of we can learn a lot of things, and also you are still remembered in India, and even in the Twitter sections of various page, people still talk about your expertise, your analysis of the game. So again, we also miss you, and hopefully we will see you in India. So, sir, at first I will just start with the talking points. So you joined the Indian Super League club Pune City FC in 2018 and spent 2 years managing in the league. What excited you about Indian football and the Pune City FC project?
Well, the truth be known, I always wanted to manage and coach abroad. I always wanted to challenge myself. I can say it's very easy to have a changing room full of English-speaking people and being able to impart your vision and your philosophy and your way of coaching, your way of playing football. It's very easy to get that across to an English-speaking group. When I first arrived at Pune City, and it was through Trevor Morgan how I originally came to India. Trevor was an old playing partner of mine at Bolton Wanderers back in the early 90s. And Trevor had left the country, went to Australia, and then he had a very successful time, as you well know, at East Bengal. And Trevor, I think, was applying for the job at Pune City. And unfortunately, he couldn't get the position for whatever reason. You know, I don't want to go into that. He just couldn't get the position. And then in the same interview to Gaurav Madwell, he actually suggested my name, and Gaurav was interested straight away. That led to an interviewing process by telephone first and foremost. And then when Gaurav Madwell requested me to come over to India, I still wasn't 100% sure that I had the position. But my CV read quite successfully in the Premier League in England and in the Championship in England. So I'd had a lot of experience in English football at the highest level. And Gaurav, we sat down, and I was enthused by the way this guy had a vision for Pune City. I wanted to join the club. I wanted to join his journey. And but one of the main things that I wanted to take with me was the experience of Trevor Morgan. Having Trevor as an assistant or on my backroom staff, I thought was a key component to any success that I was going to have. And consequently, when Trevor had interviewed for my position and Gaurav knew that, when he suggested, would you work with Trevor, it was a no-brainer. It was an absolute no-brainer. His experience at East Bengal, he was going to bring all of that with him, and his experience in Asia and Asian football in itself. That was something I knew nothing about. But having done that and having said to Trevor, would you join me? And he said yes. I then had to make inroads into the football club. And there was lots of things to be concerned about, but it was lots of things to embrace. And one of the things that I embraced when I first arrived, I know there was a as a 25-man squad rule, where there were 7 foreigners and 5 could play, but there was 18 Indian boys. And that was the most important part for me, the Indian boys and what they were going to bring to the party. We had some experienced guys in there. We had some experienced players in there, not just at ISL level, but at I-League as well. And they gelled together with what I was trying to give them as a platform for success, to the extent where in the last 8 games of that season, we won 5 games, we drew 2 and we lost 1, and we qualified for the playoffs because of that. So it was a successful time and I really enjoyed it. I cannot tell you how much that was almost as good as any of the seasons that I'd managed in England, because of the success of being able to communicate and get my points of view across with Spanish-speaking players, with Indian, and you know as well as I do, there's so many languages in India. I was speaking some languages were little words in Hindi, and I was trying to learn that. All of this was a massive, massive learning curve for me. And it was a no-brainer again to extend the contract, albeit Pune City and the franchise was being sold to Hyderabad. It was a no-brainer for me to carry on because of the success that we had, but also the challenge. I was really enjoying the challenge of the people, the challenge of the culture, the challenge of the type of football, the challenge of the changing room not being able to understand me, for instance. All of them things were really something for me to get out of bed for. You know, I really enjoyed being on the training ground and getting my points of view across, and then doing it to the group and then doing it to the individual. You know, the individual was the key component. And I just enjoyed every minute of it. When I was asked to come back to do the TV work, again, you know, all of these things that I'm telling you now, to get them across on the waves, you know, to actually say these on, you know, on the airplay, as it were, on the TV screens, again, was something that I was hoping that people were going to pick up on, and maybe they would be inspired by what I was saying. They would be inspired by Indian football. And I think that has been the case. I think there's some great examples back in England of English coaches coming over. Owen Coyle, we know, but I knew Peter Reid very well. But people like Simon Grayson this year, people like Des Buckingham, people like, you know, the national team manager who decides to become, you know, a domestic manager. All of them things for me were a nice challenge, but also for me to embrace Indian football further down the line with regards to the media. The point I would like to emphasize is sometimes in England, I've had probably maybe 6 or 7 clubs. And of them 6 or 7 clubs, every time you move in England, you are famous or infamous, whichever the case may be, for your previous role. And yes, I've had success at a lot of levels, you know, at Premier League level, at Championship level, promotion from the 2nd division to the 1st division through the playoffs. And all of these experiences give people an opinion of you, give people an overall view of the person, of the individual. But the main part of my role in terms of communication skill was going to be tested to the utmost level, meaning you're talking to people who don't actually, I mean, sometimes I talk in English over here, and because of my northern accent, sometimes people don't even understand me in English. So to go to India, to be able to communicate to Indian players and also see the fruits of your labor on a Saturday, or well, I'm saying a Saturday on a match day, see the fruits of your labor coming good. That for me is one of the most pleasing things, the most rewarding things I've ever witnessed as a coach.
You have been closely associated with Indian football for over 5 years now. So how have you seen the football culture and the quality evolving and developing over the years?
I could give you individual examples for sure, but I also believe, and I've been working closely with a friend who is now making good inroads in the English game, none more so than at Liverpool. And he's a former player that I played with at Halifax Town back in the day, a lad called Lee Richardson, who's now moving forward his thought process in terms of psychology. And it's something I wanted to bring into Indian football as a coach first and foremost, not as a pundit, but as a coach, because I think if you're working with individuals and you want to try and improve every pillar of their game, meaning technically, tactically, socially, you name all of the different angles that you can improve an individual, not just in football, but in life. the psychological part of football is the weakest part, not just in India, in every nation, I think, in every league in the world. We don't work hard enough. We don't work deep enough. We don't work strong enough. We don't pay it as much attention as what we should be doing. And this awareness of your development is a key component to anybody being successful in the game. And I wanted to bring that into Indian football. And I think if we do bring that into Indian football, however it arrives, I think the Indian football will actually accelerate his progress. And instead of it being sort of 26, 27, 28-year-old and coming to play ISL, you're now playing at 20, 21, 22, because you've developed yourself as an individual off the field of play. If this can be brought into the Indian game, I think the development of the Indian game will be unrecognisable. However, having said that, there've been 9 seasons where the ISL has been developed over the years, and that's probably more on a technical point of view, not so much the financial point of view, but I think people are paying a lot more attention on the training ground to individuals improving their technical game. The tactical side of the game is very much so on the up because of the quality of the coach that's coming to India now. And I firmly believe that if the ISL continues in this vein, there's a great opportunity for to qualify for the World Cup whenever they decide. And I really believe that. I think if India decide that, we're going to take 2 World Cups before we qualify, with 8 years' time. I think if the Indians put their mind to it, and more importantly, the ISL puts its mind to it and develops players, not quicker, I don't mean quicker, I think develops players that are now probably 21, 22, 23. In 2 World Cups' time, they are 30, 31. They've got a vast experience. They've got a lot more games under the belt because of the way the ISL has developed. And also the trophies like the Durand Cup for the pre-season friendlies, the Super Cup, the AFC, all of the trophies. If you're now extending a season and you're getting more development whilst playing, I think it's only a matter of time before India do progress from a national point of view. And I think Stephen Constantine would probably be one of the first ones to admit that. I know through my relationship with Paul Macefield that Igor Stimac is very, very keen to get India to another level. But all of this has to come together. All the powers that be have to come together, sit around the table to develop the project even further. But now it's 9 years old. I really believe that between 9 and 15 years old, India will have moved to a level unrecognizable now.
As a footballer, you have played under Mr. Sam Allardyce and later on also served as his assistant coach. Your time with him and Bolton is widely celebrated to the date. I am a personal fan of the book Mixer, and there is a chapter regarding it, his time at Bolton. So how big an influence he has been on your development as a coach? Then what are some of the life lessons you have learned from him?
I think where Sam Allardyce is concerned, I think he's a great man. He's a big, strong character. He's had a couple of recent gigs, one at West Bromwich Albion, one at Leeds United, where he was given very, very little time to survive and then consequently didn't. But for a manager of his stature to have managed over half the Premier League in terms of numbers, 10 teams, maybe 11 teams in the Premier League, and he has this survival record. So therefore he has become in England a little bit of a specialist with regards to survival. But in the early days at Bolton Wanderers, it was about a strategy and a plan, a long-term strategy. And when we got together in the Championship, we had worked together for a couple of years, a couple of seasons at Blackpool first and foremost. And Sam had played for Bolton Wanderers, I had played for Bolton Wanderers. And when we got together as a management team at Bolton Wanderers, it was a great recipe for success. It was one of them where it was almost a marriage made in heaven. He had the club at heart. I had the club at heart. We had the best will of interest where this football club was concerned. We wanted to compete at the highest level. We were in the Championship at the time. But that yo-yo club mentality of promotion, relegation, 3 times in the 90s, it had become a little bit of a stigma where Bolton Wanderers were concerned. Sam was a long-term plan, a long-term strategist. And for to be part of that backroom staff was a great learning curve for me. I always knew one day I would manage myself, and he always knew that as well. He always knew I was going to manage a team and I would go off and do my own thing. But we had that understanding. When you've got that understanding, then you've got a chance to be successful together. Regardless of your ambition, you park that. You park that for the ambition of the football club, and which we did. We worked so well together. We had 6 or 7 years of great success. We missed out on promotion the first year by being beaten in the playoffs, and then we got promoted through the playoffs by beating David Moyes against Preston North End. We beat them 3-1 in the final, and we got promoted to the Premier League. But then we survived for 5-6 seasons together, and we slowly but surely every year got a little bit sick of just surviving. We just started getting better players in. We started investing a little bit more heavily in wage structures. We weren't spending a lot of money in the transfer market because Sam was using the loan market very, very well. He was using the loan market ahead of everybody else fabulously well. I mean, bringing in likes of JJ Okocha and Yuri Okayev, Ivan Campo, Stelios Giannakopoulos, all of these guys. We managed to get together almost like a world-class team playing in the Premier League, but playing for Bolton Wanderers. It was quite astonishing to the rest of the footballing world, certainly in the Premier League. And then we managed to qualify for Europe. When we qualified for Europe, I then recognised in my own head that I joined the club in the second division as a player. I'm now leaving the club in Europe. Now that for me is a journey that I had gone on with various managers, with various players, but the most important one was the guy at the end, which was Sam Allardyce. I told him I wanted to manage myself, which I said. Derby County became available, and he was the first guy on my CV to speak to the owners of Derby County and say, take this guy. So I eventually started flying myself, and the rest is history about Hull City, etc., which we'll get onto. But the learning curve of them 7 years together with Sam was just absolutely priceless. We were learning together. We were feeding off each other. We were feeding off sports science. We were feeding off anything that we could get our hands on that wasn't going to cost an awful lot of money, but an awful lot of time and expenditure from our point of view. We were absolutely gleaning the whole market with everything we possibly could. And we thrived on that. We survived on that. And then consequently, we succeeded on that.
I can just tell one thing. I have listened to so much. I have read so much about this Bolton side. Just listening to this story, I was just engulfed within the story because the amount of work that was done there, the amount of modern expertise which was done there, something which was way ahead of its time. So just listening to it was a great experience.
The one thing you've got to admit, though, it was so far ahead of its time. At the moment, there's a lot of people doing what we were doing. But because we were ahead of the game, we didn't brag about it. We just kept quiet. We were just exhausting every avenue we possibly could to just try and get 1 more percent. Just try and get another percent. And before you know it, you're getting more percents than the opposition. The next thing you know, you're overtaking the opposition, So all of these things were a great learning curve for me.
One thing I learned that the video analysis technique was also started by then back at Bolton, and it was revolutionary. No other Premier League club was doing that, Premier League clubs. And it was started so it was way modern at its time, sir.
It was called Prozone at the time. And
yes, sir, absolutely.
I think there was a little battle going on with ourselves and Steve McLaren, who was at Derby County at the time. And we were just trying to improve the product because we knew if we improved our individual product, and this is what I'm referring back to where Indian football is concerned, if you improve your own environment and everybody's doing the same, then the whole product spirals up. It has to, because we're getting better. Derby County, who were with Steve McLaren, they're getting better. And then consequently, the big boys are looking at us and what's coming over their shoulder. Little teams are coming over their shoulder and catching them up. And okay, they can spend a lot of money in the transfer market. We couldn't. We didn't have that budget. So consequently, we had to maximize our resources. And when we maximized our resources, the Manchester Uniteds, the Arsenals, they were looking at saying, why aren't we doing that? So it can only end up with success and global success if India do copy that kind of project.
The next part of the question is a bit on the other side as well. That is, you joined Hull City in 2006. Your time at the club was filled with its ups and downs and controversies that often made you a soft target for the media and the fans. So, how do you look back at that phase of your managerial career?
I believe the soft target was born out of the fact that nobody expected Hull City to qualify for the Premier League. When we do qualify for the Premier League, we then have to believe that we belong there. And when you believe that, you have that belief, it's almost you're being laughed at by the outsiders, but you know inside that you believe you deserve to be there. You've done everything you need to get there. And now you're there, you're going to have a crack at it. You know, you're going to have a go at it. And I firmly believe what I learned at Bolton Wanderers under Sam Allardyce, I was putting into practice at Hull City, but I had to do it my way. You know, I couldn't just do it Sam's way. And I think it has to be said that the reason why I brought Brian Horton to the football club and Steve Parkin was the experience they had as managers. I had an assistant manager with over 1,000 games as a manager. I had a first team coach with over 350 games as a manager. This vast experience behind me, I was gonna bleed dry. I was gonna take everything they would give me. And you're sitting in the hot seat, you're the one whose head falls. So you have to make enough right decisions. And to qualify in 104-year history for the Premier League suggested that we were making enough right decisions. We weren't spending copious amounts of money on transfer fees. We weren't spending copious amounts of money on budgets. Our budget in the Premier League was competitive for the bottom, maybe 4, 5, 6 teams. And therefore, if we finished at the top of that league, we would be finishing in 15, 16. That would be enough to get another 70 million in the coffers to stay in the Premier League for another year, to maybe reinvest in a training ground and the progress that we've made at Bolton Wanderers, we were going to try and do the same at Hull City. But again, I've got to keep on emphasising we have our own brand, we have our own strategy, we had our own plan. It's just running in conjunction or parallel with what I was learning at Bolton Wanderers. But the backroom staff that I managed to get together, for me, were the reason for my success. I can firmly put my hand on my heart and say that I had many, many conversations, long conversations with Steve Parker and Brian Horton, and we often came to the right decision, and that was the beauty of the success that we had. We managed after 9 games, and I think it's still a record for a newly promoted team, let alone 104-year history. After 9 games, we had 20 points on board. And bearing in mind, I was thinking anything above 30, 35, 36 points was going to survive that year. We then had almost 30 games to get another 15, 16 points, which is not beyond the realms of possibility. But we keep on nailing, when you get into that bad run, it's very difficult to get out of it. So we had to be wary, we had to be mindful, we had to be careful, we had to plan and strategize each game and then put it on the back burner. As soon as that game was passed, it would be on the wave behind and you had to address the next one. And yes, we have, recollections, and everybody, when you say a soft target, we were a soft target when I did the halftime team talk at Manchester City. But again, you put that into context. We had a £16 million budget and they had one player on the field, a player that was worth 33 million. So that puts it into perspective. So regardless of what the media was saying about us and what they were giving us in terms of a hard time, we had our own beliefs. We had our own plan and strategy. And the hardest part was to try and protect the changing room. When I'd opened up the whole world to the changing room, I had to then close the doors and protect them again. And eventually, that was the year we got another survival and another 70 million in the coffers. So, albeit it was a bad plan and strategy for that Saturday or that moment, possibly it was the right one.
Football is often an escape from the reality, but again, most of your tenure at Hull City is remembered as a success. But now coming to this question, which is in context with that is you spent a significant amount of time in your career managing Championship and the Premier League clubs. So how do you believe in playing style of the top English football clubs have evolved in the past 2 decades, especially the last decade, where we have seen the influx of foreign coaches and a whole lot of different footballing philosophies coming into English football as well.
The way football has gone over the last 10 years, not so much 20, but 10 years, the technical side of the game has developed beyond recognition almost from the year, I'd say maybe from the years that we were Bolton Wanderers between 1999 and 2005, and then Hull City until 2012. The last 10 years, the quality of the football that is being played has done nothing but impress me from a technical point of view, where everybody is playing football from the back, everybody's playing through the lanes, everybody is passing the ball, is an emphasis on possession, and it's born out of the Manchester City, the remarkable Manchester City and the City Group, who now have a sort of a stronghold on world football. And what I mean by that is nothing wrong with that stronghold on world football. What it does is it improves the whole product because everybody has to compete. And it's no longer, I think Manchester City, I'm just using that in the terminology that Manchester City have now won 5 Premier League titles out of 6. Arsenal gave a good run for them for the money. But Manchester City, very, very cleverly, in my opinion, went from being able to pass through the thirds to being able to hit a big number 9. And being able to do both is something that they've added to their string to their bow. Erling Haaland has been a fantastic acquisition. And I thought, you know, the striker that they let go to Arsenal, the Brazilian lad, I thought maybe they'd let him go a little bit too early. I thought that's maybe a different string to the bow. When Erling Haaland's not playing, maybe, you know, a different way to play. But I think you can never contradict or criticise Manchester City in terms of the game plan. They always seem to get it right, and being able to probably win a treble this year. If they beat Manchester United at Wembley, that's the second trophy. And then if they beat Inter Milan International in the Champions League final, that's a bridge that maybe they thought was too far. But it's been a fabulous year. But it's also been a great year, and I have to say this, it's been a great year in the English Premier League for the likes of Brighton, for the likes of Brentford, for the likes of Fulham. And these are managed by foreign coaches that have come in here into England, and they are giving Manchester United, Spurs, Arsenal, they're giving teams that are below Manchester City's level, they're giving them a good run for their money and qualifying now through league status, you know, in the top half of the Premier League. And that has been the way football is now in the last 5-10 years. If you're willing to put your whole coaching credentials on the table and say, I'm going to play and play and play right the way through your career, and you live and die by that, you stand or fall by that, then you've got a great chance of succeeding. If you think it's all about big, strong, tough guys that we were at Bolton Wanderers back in the day, there wasn't so many technical teams about in them days. So you could actually be physical against the likes of a Liverpool and maybe win the game, the likes of a Manchester United and win the game. So it's the balance of technicality now is very, very much so swung football into a good era.
Do you view tactics as an extension of a coach's non-negotiable coaching philosophy, or do you view it as an adaptable strategic solutions to the match-related problems? It is a question which is now tearing apart the football tutelage. This one question.
I think you've got to be adaptable as a coach. You can't have one way of thinking. You can't have one way of, your philosophy is important for sure. How you believe football should be played is so important. But that comes across in the way you are as a person. That comes across in the way your team portrays you as a football manager or a footballer. But I think tactically now, you know, if you're talking about experience is so important. You know, you see, as a guy that's working in the media quite often now, you know, I look at games and I get quite distracted when people are actually saying to me, you spotted that so early. How did you manage to do that? You know, you spot a change in somebody, the way they play, or you spot a change in a system. If I'm above watching a game of football, which I don't quite often get the privilege of as a coach at the touchline, a coach at the touchline for me, you get a feel for the game, you get a vibe for the game, you get get part of you become part of the game. I always had a coach that was close to me, either an assistant manager or first team coach that was in the stand watching the game from above, just to see if there was any tactical changes required, maybe at half time. But during the course of games, a lot of managers are very fluent. A lot of managers, I witnessed recently Eddie Howe, Newcastle United, went to Tottenham Hotspur, went to the new stadium at Spurs, and I witnessed 2 or 3 changes in a system during the course of the first half. And they came in at half time 2-0 up. And fans on the touchline, on the sidelines, in the stands, they were moaning and groaning about, the way Spurs were playing. Newcastle didn't allow Spurs to play. They kept the ball, but they moved, and it was important. It was more the fullbacks than anything else. Dan Burn was playing left-hand side centre-back. He then went to left fullback in a 4. He then went to left wing-back in a 5. And you're getting the same on the right-hand side. And when you're capable of doing that during the course of a game, that fluidity, for me, is the most important tactic that you can have in your bow. A string to your bow. But you have to get that across. There's a lot of times as a manager, I've tried to change a system before a game on the training ground, and I've lost a player. I've lost 2 players because they can't quite understand what's required and why it's required. When you've got a group of players that understand why it's required, it's to maybe baffle the opposition. It's maybe to get to the weakness of the opposition. It may be to deflect your weakness. It could be various reasons. If you can get a group of players that understand you as a coach, and it's not a change because you're feeling weak, it's a change because you want to be stronger. You want to change because you're, at that moment in time, maybe not have as much possession as the opposition. So therefore, you want to try and commandeer the ball. So therefore, we need more people in one area of the field of play, or more people in one unit of the field of play. If I go back to, it was the final, yes, it was. There's that many games going through my head. The Luton-Coventry game, Coventry City played a 3, diamond in midfield, so block in midfield. So they had 4 midfield players, but 2 wing-backs. So they were playing a 3-6-1. So their majority of players were in the middle of the park. The majority of Luton Town's players were up front. So they had 2 players, what they could hit up front. So consequently, they played to that strength. Coventry only had 1 player up front. They had to make a change because they were 1-0 down at half time. They made the change, and the difference in the game was quite phenomenal. But when I'm talking about that on a radio, I'm sort of live and I'm going through this and I can see it happening. Some people are like, they just want to watch the game. They just want to maybe focus on the game. They're not interested in the tactical side, whereas I'm really, really interested in the tactical side. The average guy on the street that's coaching, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, I'm just saying the average guy on the street that has a qualification of some sort and therefore he's taking up coaching. If I said to him, who is the most influential player in the opposition, and he keeps on getting drawn to one guy, is that because he's the best player on the park, or is that because he's got the most space on the park? And therefore, consequently, you maybe have to change something tactically to stop this guy from getting the most space on the park, or he has to go backwards to get the ball. He has to go further back to get the ball. If he's hurting you in your final third or middle of the park to the final third, then there's a reason for that. And you have to maybe counter that and then do something about your side with the ball.
Do you prefer to set rules? And if so, how would you react in case one of your star players violates those rules? Because in the modern football, we have seen some of the biggest names and some of the biggest clubs. For example, someone like a PSG dressing room. Sometimes the dressing room is very hard to control and there are so many big players, star players, they violate rules and the coach sometimes lose the dressing room as well.
I'm not a controlling manager because I don't want to stifle performance. I want to encourage performance. I want to encourage people to express themselves. So I think the key to that is buy-in from the people that you're talking to. So I've often, as a head coach, I've often said to the players when we get together a new group, say that's in a 6-week or a 7-week or an 8-week period in a pre-season, or you just get 1 or 2 big players in to improve you, whichever the case may be. You put it to them, how do you want to look? How does a successful team look to you guys? And you tell me what the rules are. And I write them off. I sign them off, as it were. But I actually get them to buy into the rules. I actually get them to make the rules. And I think that for me if you got buy-in from a group of players, when it comes to punishment, when it comes to reprimand, when it comes to stopping somebody from doing something wrong, it's actually them that's actually said that we shouldn't be doing this, we shouldn't be doing that. If we want to look like a high-performing team, this is what it looks like off the field of play. We know what it looks like on the field of play, but this is what it needs to be. You need to have pieces in place so that when we do enter the field of play, we are that high-performing team. And I think that's been one of the successes that we had at Bolton Wanderers in the early days, when we had a lot of good characters, but we had a lot of challenging characters. You know, we had a lot of characters that you would say they've won World Cups. So say if you, the Yorkie, have said something in a team talk, I'm listening because he's won a World Cup. So if he said something that needed contradicting, I would contradict it, but I would wait for the feedback. If he couldn't come back, then he's not right. He's wrong. Having said that, the group that you've got needs to be strong, needs to be full of character. For me, I always like a team full of characters, and sometimes I've got too many strong characters, and that maybe doesn't work. But I absolutely give them the license. You tell me what the rules are. I'll write them off. Don't get me wrong. I'll tell you whether I agree with that, and you can cleverly manipulate that if you want to, for and against. But give them ownership of what we're trying to achieve.
Everything at the senior level football is based around winning games, and as a manager, you cannot win without having a proper understanding and backing of your players as well. So how do you integrate humanity and empathy in a high performance environment, keeping in mind in the modern times social media has taken a lot of toll on the players because they are on the social media, and there is sometimes rampant, the word I will say is misbehavior from the social media folks as well. So how do you have to integrate humanity and empathy in a high performance environment, as well as in this high performance world there is always an empathy and focus on winning? How do you have to balance those things, winning and also at the same times let the players know and how to see that they have the proper understanding of the game as well?
I think this is a great question. For me, the two big words, humanity and empathy, they're very, very big words in my dictionary, my history, my background. I think one of the questions that you will ask is about, what advice I'd ever give to a young coach. And my advice is always be honest, be true to yourself. I think honesty is so important. I think we're competitive. There's no doubt about it. That doesn't mean to say you have to cheat to try and win. But you do have to sort of push the boundaries. You do have to try and be as competitive as you possibly can every day, whether it be on the training ground or whether it be in a game situation. But if people see humanity and they get examples of that, if people see empathy in very, very unusual circumstances, and I can vouch on a number of occasions for this empathy or this humanity, I think once they see that, they understand it. If they're honest people, you can forget about the game to a certain extent. You can just get on with being the best person you can possibly be. And I think I've had great examples of this, and it's been honestly the most important part. Whenever I've sat in a changing room after a game, whether we've won, drawn, lost, but when you're looking at each other and you're actually pointing fingers, a lot of times you point a finger at an individual and he will either react in a negative way, react in a positive way. He'll actually say, you're right, it's understandable. We understand what you're trying to achieve here. There's lots of examples, great examples in the game, the modern day game and I think Pep Guardiola is probably one of them. That's one of that video. I always remember the video saying, well, you don't have to love me. You can hate me if you want to hate me. I just want the best. I just want to get the best out of you. And that's quite simply as simple as it gets. You've got to push yourself. You've got to go as far as you possibly can as an individual and hope that everybody's going to come along with you. And then you meet somebody that'll go further than you. And then you go, I want to go with him. And I always remember Sam making this analogy at Bolton Wanderers back in the day when we were really getting into psychology. And It's almost Sam's the train driver. Sam was on the train, and he was driving the train, and the destination, he tells you where the destination, he knows where he's going, and that is the destination he's going, and that's the train you're getting on. When you get on it, you can get off at any stop. You can get off whenever you want. You can get off after him as well. So he can push you as far as he goes, but when he gets off, you might want to go further. So the analogy of that always stuck with me, that I was on this train journey with Sam, but I wanted to go further. I wanted to be the manager. I wanted to be the train driver. I wanted to push people as far as I could push them. And I always remember the big fella was out of work. Obviously, I lost my job after I had moved from Bolton Wanderers to Derby County and became a manager in my own right. Sam was the first one on the phone when I lost my job. First one on the phone. When Sam lost his position, having left Bolton Wanderers from Newcastle, I was then on my journey at Hull City. He came to the final. He came on the coach back to the hotel after the game. So he stayed for everything that we went through. It was, he knew what I was going through because he'd been through that himself as a manager, and he knew, how I would be feeling. And you want people around you that you've gone on a journey with, and you can look at the whites of their eyes. I always say, look at the whites of their eyes, and that means you're looking right into this guy, his emotions, his background, his history, and they're great journeys. When you meet people like that, and you've been on a similar kind of journey, and you've been as far as them. I always remember Ivan Campo looking at me after we'd been beaten by Middlesbrough, and it was in the League Cup final at the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff. Bolton Wanderers, I was assistant manager, and we were talking after the game, and this guy's looking right down my eyes as if to say, do you really believe what you're saying here? Because if you do, I'm with you. You can actually, the analogy that I'm talking about, you have to be in that situation to actually live that, and it's fantastic. When you meet people like that, it's just brilliant.
You once said it's no use being a good training player if you got to be able to carry that also across the white line, because we have tons of examples of players who are very good on the training pitch, but again on the pitch somehow they couldn't carry the training performance or the training pitch performance that he has given a day before even, or 2 days before. So what does a modern day footballer especially, has to keep in mind when what he needs to do to be able to keep up his performance both in the training ground as well as the actual game itself?
It's almost a different human being when you're talking to the people that I'm leveling this at. And I don't mean this in a negative way. There's a lot of training ground players, because there's no pressure. There's no real questions being asked of you. You go on the training ground, you get a sweat on, you do your job, you do everything that the coach is asking you to the best of your ability, but there's no real emphasis on winning. And then I call them game day eyes. When you've got players in your changing room, when you look at their eyes in the changing room beforehand, he's going to be okay. Forget about anything going on at home or anything going on in his life. He's on his game. You can just see it in their eyes. And training is important, but it doesn't really mean anything. You've got to hold that thought, because is it important to a coach to get his points of view across? Absolutely. But if the player is just getting a sweat on and enjoying the fact that I'm a footballer, and he's not really concentrating on his life and all the things that are important to the coach, which are performance relative to the game, then you'll never have a successful team. You'll never have a successful career as an individual. I was very fortunate as a player, going back to my early days, that I had a couple of coaches. I had a guy called George Smith, who was a technical coach, and I had a guy called Willie Madron. Never forget them. Always remember your first coaches. And these were coaches. These weren't the managers. These were the coaches at Hartlepool United when I was a young boy. I was 18, 19-year-old. And I'd been given I was non-contracted first, but then I'd been given a pro contract because I'd finished my indenture forms as an electrician. So when I'm 20, I become a professional electrician, as it were, but I became a professional footballer at the same time. And my coaches were important. So George Smith and Willie Madron. George Smith, technical coach. Willie Madron was a stature. This guy could still play. This guy could still teach you how to play the game, show you how to play the game, because he still had that technical ability. And between the two of them, they actually got the best out of me. And now the manager was looking at me on a Saturday, and that's all he wanted to see. He didn't want to see me Monday to Friday. He just wanted to see me on a Saturday. And when he saw me play well, I never got the pat on the back. The coaches did. And I thought, that'll do for me, because I knew I'd played well. I knew with these two guys, I could only be the best Phil Brown that I could possibly be because what they were giving me. So that's the difference between a Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday, you're learning a job. Saturday is your job.
You have been in the coaching circuit for nearly 25 years and have managed in the biggest league in the world and some of the biggest names in the world football. So what advice would you give to the aspiring football coaches?
Only be honest, be true to yourself. You know, we talk about honesty. The biggest, it's the biggest commodity you can actually have in your life, let alone your football. But if you take honesty into your career and stick by it, you'll gain more friends than you will do enemies. But you'll also go a lot further in the footballing world than what you think. So just be honest to yourself. Be true to yourself. Don't cut corners. Work hard. And listen to the right advice. So Alex Ferguson once said this to me. I was a feisty young coach, and so Alex Ferguson said this to me: don't go looking for fights in football because they're round every corner. There's an argument round every corner. So don't go looking for them. Just pick and choose the right ones. And if you go looking for them, you'll get into all sorts of trouble. Make sure you just stay true to yourself and pick the fights. Don't go looking for them. And I think that's so important. So true.
Captains, that was all for today. We need to end our session here. Thanks, Mr. Phil Brown, for being with us today. To all of our viewers, thanks a lot for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss a single podcast like this. And until then, it's goodbye from Armband.